they were able to, with their minds, use intention to make an arrow on a screen move to a particular direction. And the arrow was controlled by a random number generator. So what they were doing was influencing the arrow via the random number generator. These are real things. And the mechanism is probably going to be a better understanding of physics and what physics has to do with the mind.
Why'd you catch that? Because it was going to fall. You're certain? Yeah, but it didn't fall.
Our story about it is that the future doesn't exist until we get there. The past, there's nothing we can do to change it, and we're in the now. That's our story about it.
When you were getting all these results from various research projects, did you give it a thought, for example, what does this mean from point of view, the nature of reality?
If the universe is calculated all at once, which is sort of the cosmology that I hold, and from the beginning to the end of time, so it's almost like a painting or a sculpture that's made all at once, past, future, and present are related to how humans perceive experience, right? We could be in a now, but we don't have to believe that the future is unknowable or the past cannot be changed. We could just recognize that the way our perception works is that we are in the now. It is clear to me that precognition and anything that we're currently calling anomalous in terms of human perception or behavior is key to understanding the nature of reality.
Welcome to Essential Foundation channel. Thank you for watching. Perhaps you know this famous prophecy of the Oracle of Delphi. If King Croesus crosses the Halys River, a great empire will be destroyed. Little did the king of Lydia Croesus know in 547 BC that this prophecy from the Oracle of Delphi referred to his kingdom and not to that of Persia. For centuries, people have thought to know their future. Entire kingdoms have been lost because of prophecies like this. So we will ask Professor Julia Mossbridge, how can we study extrasensory phenomena such as precognition, clairvoyance, and telepathy? We will also talk about the implications for our understanding of consciousness, time, and the nature of reality. Hello, Julia, and thank you for taking the time for this interview. Finally, we managed to do it. And I wanted to give a short introduction of yourself, but maybe also ask you to talk about your own experience in academia. You have primary background in neuroscience, and you have spent last 15 years studying the psychology, physiology, and physics of precognition and other parapsychological phenomena. So you're doing amazing range of research. I'm wondering, how and why did you come to do all of that? Because unfortunately, these are not the most obvious and the most career-enhancing choices in the mainstream academia. So how did you get to do that?
No, they're not the most obvious, are they?
No.
I always struggle with how to answer this question because all I know is that that's what happened. And that's what my heart felt pulled towards in the world of understanding the universe, which is the sort of the job of science, right, is to try to understand the universe, at least interpret it through a human lens in terms of our understanding. And what I continue to be pulled towards are these things that were not obvious. And I guess there's a part of me that must be either contrarian or curious or both. In that if someone's saying, don't look here in this corner, this isn't very important, immediately my attention goes there. And I'm like, I think I'll spend all my time in that corner. Thank you. There's a part of me that just delights in shining a light on that which has been discounted or that which has been dismissed. And so it would be a little bit of a trigger when I would hear professors or even in high school teachers use that kind of framing around something. Instead of being a trigger for avoiding it, it would be a trigger to go towards and learn more Like I remember one of my neuroscience professors talking about glia cells in college. And he would, glia, these are these cells that are not neurons. And so they were considered secondhand citizens of the brain till we started to realize, and they still are in certain circles, but we started to realize in the last few decades, guess what? They're used for signaling, and they're really important in learning. They're really important in all these sort of what we call sophisticated functions of the brain. But when I was in, let's say it was the late 80s, early 90s, when I was in college studying neuroscience, and one of my professors gave us the party line on glia. And he said, well, glia comes from the word for glue. And these are kind of like, that's perfect because these are just cells. Their job is to basically serve a nutritive function. They're like the nurse cells. They used to be called the nurse cells. They hold the brain together. They hold the neurons together. They help feed the neurons. And the way he was talking about it, I thought, oh, the nurse analogy, and at the time, nurses were almost entirely women, these are being discounted. These are given a role of like caregivers, which has no status. And underneath that is going to be hiding a lot of juicy stuff. I bet they're signaling. I bet they're involved in learning. I bet they're doing all these things, but they're not getting credit for it. Because you can hear in people's language about understanding science, not the act of science itself, but in the interpretational act, which is actually woven into science, you can hear what's being discounted and you can bet that it's important. In the same way, reverse time solutions to problems in physics are discounted. So high school physics teachers and college physics teachers will say, of course, the solution is a negative T solution and a positive T solution, but we let go of the negative T, the reverse time solution, because we don't see that in nature. As soon as someone says we don't see that in nature, therefore we're dismissing this mathematical truth, you have to ask, really? Do we really not see that in nature? Do we really not see events influencing each other backwards in time in nature? And the answer is, of course, yes, we do see that in nature. But physics hasn't caught up, high school and college physics hasn't caught up to that yet. So it's this kind of personality trait where it's look at what's being discounted and get really curious about it that I think has brought me to these non-obvious places.
So it sounds almost that one has to be extra critical and a little bit of a rebel to explore and to bring science forward. I think that's more or less what you're saying, I guess. But where would you position yourself today with all the range of your background in academia, what you worked on? Where are you in neuroscience? Would you position yourself in right now?
In the world of neuroscience, I would say I'm now not really doing neuroscience. I'm more. I still do some empirical work that could be related to cognitive neuroscience in the psychology sense, on the cognitive side of cognitive neuroscience. I don't have a lot of interest anymore in how the brain is accomplishing these feats, because these feats are feats of the mind. So while I have the training in cognitive neuroscience, the cognitive part is the heavy part for me. What is the brain? How does the brain think? How does the brain perceive? How does attention work? How does memory work? How does music change the brain / but what I'm really asking is, how does music change the mind? How does memory work in the mind? It's the cognitive part that really had me. And the brain is related to it all in ways that we don't understand, but isn't the whole story. And I think neuroscience became pretty sexy. And the reason I went into neuroscience, like so many other neuroscientists, was because I thought, studying, if I just study the brain, then I could understand what the mind does, because this is the root of it. It was a very reductionistic impulse, right? And I had been trained to believe that, and I believed it, and I wasn't critical about that. And I just thought that is what's going to happen. And then I had this conversation with my stepmom, who's a psychoanalyst, and she tried to ask me. She was just curious. She wasn't judging, but she was curious. She said, "Why are you interested in ion channels?" these little things on the synapses that control, whether neurotransmitters released, for instance. Because if you understand ion channels, you could understand transmission between neurons. Oh, cool. So if you understand transmission between neurons, she said, then what do you know? Well, if you understand transmission between neurons, then you could understand circuits. Okay, so if you understand circuits, what do you get? Well, if you could understand circuits, then you could understand how learning happens and how thoughts happen in the brain. Okay, cool. So what if you understand how every thought and every piece of memory and everything that you learn, and everything that you think and dream, how that works in the brain? Then what?
And then you understand love. That's what you thought, right? Or
No,
what is
I
it
said,
to feel color red?
I said, you've got nothing. I said, you got nothing.
Materialist.
And that's when I dropped out of my neuroscience program. I went into cognitive neuroscience and psychophysics, which are domains of understanding the mind. Because I realized that, so what if you understood how every circuit in a particular person's brain related to their thoughts? It gets you to maybe being able to do mind control or to train people better or to help with people with diseases, but it doesn't with neurological diseases, and those are important things. Like, I don't know if you think mind control is important, but I think that people are competitive about it. But it doesn't get you to the hard problem of consciousness, right? Which is clearly what I was hoping to answer, which is, how does this physical substance of the brain relate to this non-physical substance of the mind? Is it causal? Is it an effect of the mind? Is it in some kind of two sides of the same coin? So what her sort of innocent questioning from a psychoanalyst who is only used to dealing with the mind, what that got me to is, I'm not going to get anywhere by studying the mechanisms of the brain without understanding mind.
Fascinating story. You mentioned some of your research on EXP, extrasensory perception, and maybe something else you're working right now. So we are curious, what is your research all about, and what are the most interesting cases that you worked on?
Yeah, some of the things I worked on, largely I'm known for my research in the science world. What I'm known for is largely my research on precognition. So the ability to predict future events that you can't predict based on inference from information, whether it's conscious or unconscious, based on direct causality. In other words, it's not fair to say, I had a dream about fish and then I had fish for dinner, and therefore it was a precognitive dream, because you can cause that. And that's not based on just your subconscious memory, which is a bit like inference. In other words, my son likes to call every Thursday night at 6. This is also the same time that his stepfather and I have a date. There's a relationship between these things, although he does not admit it. But it doesn't count as precognition for me to wake up on a Thursday and say, I'm going to hear from my son tonight, right? So it's a little like inference, but it's more like memory-based, I guess. Yeah, maybe they're the same thing. Anyway, precognition can be measured physiologically. It can be measured through behavior, like unconscious behavior, like how quickly you press a button based on a future stimulus. And it can be measured from conscious behaviors, like I'd like to ask you to draw a picture of the image that you'll see that will be randomly selected in the future. And I know that this sounds crazy because it's going to be randomly selected in the future and you don't know what it is, but please, just whatever comes into your head, please draw that image. So that's an example of conscious behavior that measures precognition. I've done experiments in all of those areas, multiple experiments in all of those areas, or those measurement methods, let's say, for precognition. And in each case, I've seen that precognition is happening on average among humans who are unselected for the capacity. Now, I've started to work more with people who are more gifted, and to see how that goes. That's where I'm moving into. But this is very similar to many other people in the field who at first start looking at everyone and then go towards more gifted people. When I say people in the field more broadly, like the ESP or telepathy, clairvoyance, psychokinesis, mediumship, precognition. These are the main sort of, I guess, disputed and yet selectively proven phenomena in the field of parapsychology, or ESP. And so that's what I'm known for in the world of science. And then I have many, many feet outside the world of science, where I work on AI and innovative uses of AI in governments. And I work on issues related to democracy. I work on unconditional love and technology, quantum computing, and technologies related to decentralized AI. So with the company that I lead called Lightweight Quantum. So I have these various, frying pans in the fire, and I'm doing less and less of science because it doesn't pay very well, and also I can do it on the side while I do other things that actually pay well. But I'm still involved in that world a little bit, I would say. And I have many thoughts about that, if you want to talk about that.
I was wondering, were there cases or results that you achieved that you yourself were surprised with? Something like, wow, I didn't expect to find out that.
That happens a lot.
Really? Oh, excellent.
When I first came to this field, I had read Dean Radin's work, especially. I'd read all his papers, I'd read all his books. And the stuff he was talking about when it came to precognition, because since I was a kid, I've had precognitive experiences. I wasn't surprised that was real. I felt validated, right? Because I've had so many detailed precognitive experiences. I felt like, yes, we really don't understand how time works. And he was speaking to, we don't understand how time works. Clearly there's something up. So I wasn't surprised by that. But I sort of thought, is this physiological? That was the first stuff I looked at scientifically, it was the physiological stuff, the stuff called presentiment. So this is your body, whether you're conscious of it or not, preparing for a future event that you are not, the caveat is you are not causing, or that you're not inferring from your regular senses, what we call the regular senses. I thought, well, is this stuff really real? Because I was aware of the conscious forms of precognition, like dreams that you remember, or just waking visions or experiences of this will happen now. I was very familiar with those, but this unconscious stuff I was drawn to because, of course, the unconscious everyone ignores, right? And so had I in my career. So my first set of experiments was around the physiology, looking at skin conductance and heart rate in people before randomly selected, a picture of a gun versus a picture of a sunset. And you don't know what's going to come, but it turns out that on average, before the picture of the gun, you have a certain pattern versus a picture of a sunset. And in fact, there's what appears to be a gender difference, which may be related to sex at birth. Not sure. In those response patterns. But I was surprised by that it happened. It was so easy to show. The gender difference was so clear. And then when on average, and then when I tested myself to see if in a particular person, I thought, I'll just test myself again and again. I did it 625 times. Again and again, I tested myself to see if I was more like a man or like a woman in my pattern, or neither. And I was more like a woman. I was surprised by that. I was surprised that I was more like a woman because I have sort of masculine and feminine traits. And I think any woman in the world of science who's running a lab, you end up with this masculine and feminine traits because of the nature of the culture of science. And so that's something that surprised me. The gender difference that showed up surprised me, but then that I was grouped in with the women, I'm like, oh, all right, that makes sense.
And how that gender difference manifested? How when you say gender difference, I start wondering, what is the difference and how did it manifest in the results?
It's not the case for all precognition, but for this unconscious precognition, like presentiment, I think it's pretty common. And I've also looked at it in unconscious precognition in an experiment with Mark Whitman. But that was using behavioral responses. So I think there's a different story. I wrote a review on this called Precognition at the Boundaries that you can find online. And it talks about how there's different characteristics of conscious and unconscious precognition, and they may be two different mechanisms or partially unrelated mechanisms, and maybe partially shared. But the way it looks in that experiment, the one I'm thinking of for the presentiment, which you could find in the meta-analysis and also in the Precognition at the Boundaries, was that for men, before they were about to win, this was a single trial experiment. So this isn't a gun versus a sunset stimulus. Instead, the stimulus is whether you guessed correctly or not. So the stimulus is made from an interaction between your inner desire to guess what a target is correctly and the outcome. So you're shown 4 targets on a screen, which are targets are just photos. And then a random number generator, after you've selected the one you think is going to win, a random number generator selects one of the 4 and then presents it to you. At that moment, we know that people have an arousal response, right? Like, oh, I got it, yay, or oh, I didn't get it, that sucks. So after the fact, we know that. And what I was looking at was before the fact. So starting at about 10 seconds before, when I'm talking about skin conductance right now, although I've shown the same thing in heart rate variability, heart rate changes. About 10 seconds before you know whether you got it right or not, for men, you see an arousal response, just like the arousal response afterwards. They get more excited, in other words, and like really more excited. For men, this is very pronounced. I had to change the axis when looking at women's to compare because it's just ridiculous. But more excited when they're about to be right. When they're about to be wrong, not as excited. This matches after the fact. And this is the same in heart rate, although less pronounced, but still there, still significant. For women, it's borderline significant both in heart rate and skin conductance, and it's the opposite. So women are more likely to be calmer or less aroused when they're about to be correct, and more aroused when they're about to be incorrect. So for women, the arousal state is opposing pre-decision is opposing post-result. So this is so interesting. This could be cultural. This could be some kind of hormonal thing, but there's a basic difference in gambling addiction between men and women. There are at least twice as many male addicted gamblers than there are female addicted gamblers. And if you imagine, this is just a one trial task, but if you imagine on the first trial, if you're a man and you're about to win and your body gets ramped up and you have this excitement and then it's validated, the very first time you gamble, you want that again. Because your body knew it, and then it happened, right? For women, there's so much less of a pre-response to either winning or losing, so that the winning or losing, feels good or not, but it's nowhere near the level, even afterwards, nowhere near the distinction between winning and losing as for men. And again, I'm talking about gender. So at the time I did these experiments, we didn't ask about sex at birth. So all I know is gender. And people group themselves into male and female. So I think there's something really important there. The physiological response to your expectation meeting the result, regardless of the world of time and how that works. I just think that's really interesting. And it was, of course, validating that it was replicated in the heart rate data.
Interesting. My first thought was dopamine release, right? What women get out of some activities and what men get out of other type of activities. So and the importance of winning, right? And the
The
other thought
importance
which
of
I had,
winning.
and the other thought I thought, oh, we need to hunt the mammoth, for men, right? So that
It would
could
be
be
so-
evolutionary stuff.
Yeah, it would be so interesting to do that kind of experiment with a non-zero sum game.
Mhm. Yeah.
I wonder if you'd see a different pattern. Yeah.
But if you think about kind of generally, and maybe it's difficult to pinpoint specific moments, when you were getting all these results from various, research projects, did you give it a thought? For example, what does this mean from point of view the nature of reality? I mean,
Yes.
it's a mega question, but maybe some sort of general lines. What did it mean for you from that perspective?
I think about that all the time. And that's my primary question, which is why cognitive neuroscience feels too small a label for what I'm after, right? I'm trying to understand the substance and the nature of time. And that has a lot to do with the nature of reality. And we're just beginning to realize that has a lot to do with the nature of reality. Because for a long time, it was all about the substance and the nature of matter and the substance of and nature of space. But time was sort of the disregarded entity, which of course is my trigger. I think time might be fundamental. There's Lee Smolin is a physicist who also has that position that time might be fundamental. And I think that that studying the nature of mind through what have been called anomalous experiences like precognition, but frankly, there's nothing anomalous about it. If you read Jim Carpenter's book, First Sight, he speaks directly to this idea that literally it's probable in his formulation, and I agree with his formulation, that the first thing that we're going to be doing is sensing the future and using that information all the time. That's our first sensory modality, and then the other ones come in. So I feel that the things that we're calling anomalous, if you think of, oh, good, the hedge behind me, or that the trees behind me are going to be a great visual for this this question or this explanation. So Thomas Kuhn wrote The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, wrote about how there are these anomalous or sort of edge scientific results. I like to call them edge science results that sort of live behind me. They live way over here, right? If this sort of the height of the trees is the sort of commonality of the results using our current scientific methods, you have a chunk of them that are over here, like in the Gaussian distribution, are over here, and then you have this long tail of ones that are not very common because they're not performed, because these are experiments that don't fit in with the current paradigm. Okay, so these edge science things we call anomalous because they don't fit in with the current theory. But what happens in the Structure of Scientific Revolutions book is he talks about how eventually these won't go away. The ones that won't go away, they're not mistakes. They're actual effects that we don't understand with our current theory. The ones that do not go away become the seeds of the new theory, and then they go over here, and now you have many, many, many results. Most results are coming to support the new theory because you've realized you've had to change your theory to support all of those edge science results, all of the ones we used to call anomalous. So, having said that, it is clear to me that precognition and anything that we're currently calling anomalous in terms of human perception or behavior is key to understand the nature of reality. So telepathy, psychokinesis, clairvoyance, mediumship, all of these have various levels of evidence that support them. And very, very quickly, especially with the advent of quantum computing, and more people getting educated about the rules of the quantum world, or so-called rules of the quantum world, we're starting to see that these things that are previously called anomalous make perfect sense if you're willing to look at either different dimensions or just the quantum world. And our minds this idea that our minds haven't been evolved to grasp them is not really true. It's that our minds have been trained up till now to ignore them. But if you go back to some, I'm not going to romanticize, not all, but some indigenous cultures, and I don't know enough about this, so I'm going to sound really stupid because I'm not an anthropologist, but check with your local anthropologist. If you go back to some indigenous cultures or read the Tyson Yucca Porter book, Sand Talk, and similar books, or Braiding Sweetgrass, indigenous cultures have had as their wisdom that the mind can and does respond to what we're currently calling anonymous on a regular basis as part of the way to make decisions and move about in the world. And it works. So we're in a transition in the West, in developed countries, in science-first cultures, to start to see that even if you ride the train of science first, it takes you to that same station.
What do you think is the mechanism? What is it? Do you have a hypothesis? Is there a viable hypothesis? In principle, is it possible to explain the mechanisms for ESP? How does it work?
Yes. I mean, the basic mechanism is quantum function being noticed at the classical scale. Just standard. I mean, so really, it's all kind of uninteresting when you start to think about quantum mechanics. For instance, telepathy, right? Entanglement between two people. Now they're separated, and there must be something about the mind that isn't related to quantum entanglement. You can go read Roger Penrose's work with Stuart Hameroff on this. There's other people who work in that space, but precognition, time symmetry. There's time-symmetric interpretations of quantum mechanics that are growing in popularity because they explain a lot. So psychokinesis, there must be something about the mind, especially with the recent results coming from Morris Friedman's lab at Baycrest in Canada. There must be something about the mind that can interact with physical systems using intention. I have results in psychokinesis as well. So something's going on. These are real things. And the mechanism is probably going to be just a better understanding of physics and what physics has to do with the mind and incorporating the mind into physics. Because clearly, even from the observer effect and even the Schrödinger cat thought experiment, the mind has something, observation has something to do with physics. And physics probably has something to do with observation. And so looking at the symmetry between mind, body, physics, observation, I think of this a lot as bosons, fermions. Bosons are so mind-like. Sorry, a little physics background. All particles are either bosonic or fermionic, either bosons or fermions. So things like protons, neutrons, and electrons are fermions. Things like photons and the Higgs boson are bosonic. But so is a helium-4 atom. Helium-4 is the most common isotope of helium. And it's just kind of around. And what does it mean to be bosonic or fermionic? Bosons have this amazing property of their identities do not depend on where they are in space or time. So most of things in the world, when we think of something that's a thing, I'm going to get my water bottle to demonstrate also to take a drink of water. We think of things as being identified not only as, their color, their shape, what they can do, like carrying water, their molecular structure, how much we like or don't like them. Then we think of these as definitions of things. But another piece of the definition of a thing is that another thing cannot occupy the same space as this thing unless it can go in it, right? It just doesn't occupy the same space. Bosons, you can put as many bosons that are exactly the same, You can put as many bosons as you want in this space, as many as you want. You could also put them in any time. It doesn't matter. They're all considered the same boson. So a photon, let's say, from 1945, and a photon from like the sun up there today could be the same photon very easily. There's countless number of exactly the same photons, because all they need to do is have the same momentum, the same energy, and the same polarization for bosons generally, for the same spin. So I think there's something there related to the hard problem of consciousness, the mind-body problem. I think bosons are more like mind. I think fermions are more like physical structure or brain or body. And the fact that they can interchange, if you cool bosons enough, they can turn into fermions. If you take fermions and get them in the right configuration, like the helium isotope helium-4, they become bosons. That there's something there. This interface between the duality. The thing that links the duality is that is the real unification, right? In a dualistic world, the relationship between the dualities is the unification. So that's how I think about it.
What is the role of the brain in this whole story? Because I understand that if we take our body as a machine, and if machine gets broken, then we lose cognitive abilities. It's just so obvious, right? What I don't understand is that when people get brain trauma and all of a sudden they develop savant abilities, then this whole story of broken machine doesn't add up. So what is the role of the brain? So we need the brain for this to happen, right? For ESPs to start with, to begin with.
I'm not sure we need a brain for ESP. I think you can show things like ESP in physical systems. In fact, Gary Modell at University of Colorado Boulder has shown precognition or pre-sentiment-like behavior in a computer, which is he's randomly going to, or I forget if it was a computer or a voltage, some kind of, well, anyway, he was going to randomly unplug some device and then showed that some, was it the voltage or was it the, I don't know, the random number generator attached to it. I don't know. You can read his work, but then he was unable to replicate it. But people show this in different kinds of systems. I think it's the nature of reality, regardless of whether you're a person with a brain or a jellyfish or a rock. I think these are physical principles. And I think these physical principles have been taken advantage of. Let's use a more positive term, have been leveraged by the human brain and by other brains to interact with the non-physical. So consciousness is sort of by definition non-physical, right? That's why the hard problem exists, is that subjective consciousness has qualia, the experience of something. So somehow, right, the bridge between the brain, the physical thing, and that's designed to interact with this non-physical thing has to work. Now, how does it work? Who knows? And I don't know that it has to work to do any of the ESP stuff. I think that's basic to physics. I think it has to work to do the long-term planning stuff, the experience of, my father and my anticipation of what he'll do or what he did. The memory stuff, I think it has to work to do that. We think of that as normal brain functioning, and the ESP stuff is special. I think the ESP stuff is normal physical functioning, and this memory, learning, anticipation stuff is the special long-term use of a localized, complex physical system to interact with consciousness. And so, and yes, it's very striking. So I've had two friends now with strokes, one a very mild stroke and one an extremely devastating stroke. Both of them survived. And one of the things that's clear in both of them is the brain and the mind are definitely related. Like, you can't argue that they're not, right? But another thing that's clear in both of them is that over time, it's almost like the computer got fixed and now it can download the information it needed again from the cloud. There's a feeling to which the information has been stored offline that was needed, and it's coming back. And that's not testable. Like, you could also explain that is testable, but not by me in these circumstances. You could explain that by the brain starting to make new circuits to do things, but you still have to explain how there's the missing explanation here about how it's directing itself to function in recovery. So like there's this observer that's like contained in the brain that sort of seems to be saying, okay, now we're going to have to get this system online. Now we can get those memories back. Now it's like an orchestrating observer who is, I think, related to this global consciousness that we share in, that is like repairing the machine. Like it's almost like as if the transmission fixes the radio. Like if you could use a transmission to fix a radio, that's what it's like. And there's some cool applications of nano technology where you can put these little nanobots in someone's brain and body and have them respond to like frequency signals at the color spectrum or in the radio spectrum and have them do things. It's a bit like that, but it's always with the transmission fixing the radio. It doesn't feel like the radio is fixing itself. And so there's ways to test that, but one way that I thought of that I think would be really cool would be to don't use people who've had strokes because that's too dramatic and it's too small a population. Just get a room full of people, like students in a class, and have them write down on a piece of paper, if they still have paper and pens, if they're allowed, and have them write down the answers to questions that are on the projected on the wall. And they're simple questions about that they should know the answers to about pop culture, like who was the musical artist who had the #1 hit, last month or whatever, these things. Or showing a picture of a famous person, who is this? What I believe to be the case is that if you control your questions for amount of fame, right? These are all about like famous people. Amount of fame, amount of recent exposure, which is the hard part of the problem. Well, let's say you do that successfully. I think you'll have waves of forgetting and remembering in a particular location. I think that the people in the classroom will not be able to download certain information because to me, I've had so many times this experience with other people where if all of a sudden we could not remember this particular word or this particular actor or something, it's like the transmission is being blocked for all of us. And then it opens up. And you can explain that in many, many ways that have nothing to do with some kind of a transmission of consciousness. But one way is a transmission of consciousness for which the brain is like a filtering out. And so there's this filter model I'm sure you've heard people talk about of the brain acting like a reducing valve, right? This is sort of a famous model. And in Mossbridge, I talk a little bit about this in Transcendent Mind, Rethinking the Science of Consciousness. And I think that's an interesting model. And it's supported by evidence from Morris Friedman at Baycrest when I mentioned this stuff about psychokinesis. So he and I are collaborating on another experiment or another analysis related to precognition and the same phenomenon. But the phenomenon is that in certain stroke patients with frontal lobe lesions, they were able to, with their minds, use intention to make an arrow on a screen move to a particular direction. And the arrow was controlled by a random number generator. So what they were doing was influencing the arrow via the random number generator. And then he replicates, so he has two neurological papers on this, neurological patient papers on this. And then he replicated it using transcranial magnetic stimulation. So he would stimulate a part of the brain, which actually, when you use that stimulation, it actually reduces activity in that part of the brain. So he'd stimulate frontal lobes, reducing activity in the frontal lobe, and showed a unilateral effect. so that left hemisphere, left frontal lobe was the one responsible for, and it matched the stroke patients, was the one responsible for this psychokinetic ability. So that again suggests this idea that some of our executive function is about screening out this stuff that is really basic. Like, I think rocks can do it, right? Like, I think every physical substance can do this, and we're sort of screening it out. And because we're having to focus on the story that we have about how time works. I'm in the here and now, and there was the past, which I can't change, and there's the future, which I could potentially change. And this whole story that we have going relies on us screening out information about the future, information about someplace in space way over there, information about people who have died, right? So it's like the question becomes, the really interesting question to me becomes, why is it useful for us to screen that stuff out? What are we getting out of not having access to that stuff? Why is that what we're here on Earth doing? What is this? How is this beneficial to our growth as people? Because it's certainly happening. I don't know if it's happening through a reducing valve model, but we're definitely screening out something that's real and available.
Then what you're saying, you're definitely not saying that brain generates consciousness. I gather that.
I mean, it just doesn't make any sense.
No. But what is in your view, fundamental level of reality? What is the layer that is really fundamental? And
I think the most fundamental layer is love. So that's where I get into this idea of unconditional or universal love. Some folks call it universal love. One of my favorite mentors calls it universal love. I call it unconditional love because it reminds me of the definition, which is that without needing anything to be changed, without any conditions, the feeling is of being loved and of loving without needing any change. So it's a profound, peaceful feeling, and it's profoundly motivating. But that's the human response, I believe, to a physical force, I don't even want to call it a force, like a field. It's a human response to something fundamental. And when we access that, when we're aware of it, it's not like it doesn't exist without it. It's like the sun. If it's night, or if I close my eyes, or if I don't go outside, I don't see the sun, right? But it's still there. And I have a reaction to it when I access the sun. I feel different than when I don't. That's how I feel about unconditional love. It's this fundamental substrate of everything. And what is love? How would you define that in a physical, like in terms of physics? You would define it as the unification. It's this relationship. It's the name for the bridge. It's the name for the relationship between the dualities. It is the unifying factor. That's why it's the fundamental factor. It's the bridge. We don't usually name the bridge. We say there's a relationship between them, blah, blah, blah. This is the nature of the relationship. Well, the bridge is love. And the universe is clearly made, in the physical sense, made of relationship. There's even relational quantum mechanics that you can study about, but there's also the reality that everything is defined in the dualistic physics. Everything is defined in relationship to everything else. So what is the bridge? That has to be what's fundamental, and that's the unifying thing, and that's love.
It's a tricky word, I must say, because for people who have experienced that, I think it's no-brainer, really, what you're saying. But people who have not, they say love. Everybody says love, such a cliche word. And by the way, there is an interesting book about NDEs in children by researcher Donna Thomas in UK. And she says that kids who come back from NDEs, they call it love in darkness. They don't have words. So we would call it consciousness or whatever, right? And they call it love in darkness. So that's a remarkable, I think, name, also corresponding to what you're saying. I always struggle. How do we explain to people who never experienced that, which majority of us, right? Not people who had some mystical or spiritual experiences and know what love is. How can we give a sense what we mean?
I don't think you use words. I don't think explaining is the booby prize. Understanding something is the booby prize. As much as I love understanding things, it's not really what's essential. So I don't think you use words. You can use music. You can have them hold a baby. It's bonus points if it's their baby. Be with a dog, like a really good dog.
Experiential type of approach.
It's experiential. It's yeah, but in terms of the person, they have to want to experience it. Right? My experience is that, like, I can hold hands with someone and look into their eyes and just love, just be in a bubble of love with them. But if they are blocking off the love, because and for very good reason, like they often have very good reason, like if you're so used to conditional love, you think that love is a trick, and that love is about the other person's ego, or love is about your ego, or love is about being safe, or love is about not being safe, or all these things. You could have good reason to not want to experience it. So when one thing I say to people when they say, well, how can I experience this thing that you're talking about? I say, well, it's not intellectual. So the best thing that you can do is pray for it. And if you don't believe in prayer, or you don't believe in God, that's fine. Doesn't have to be a monotheistic intention. Hold the intention every day. Wake up and just hold the intention. Like, I don't know. I don't understand what this unconditional love thing is. I'd like to experience it.
Something else I was wondering about. People say, tend to differentiate between heart and mind, right? So they say, think with your heart, right? Or what does your heart tell you about this and that? So what do you think? Is there a role that heart play in our, perception, cognitive processes? Because there is this theory that not so long ago, a sensory neurite network was discovered in the heart. Could it be playing a role? Is heart separate from mind, or is it one perception organ in your view? What's your hypothesis about that?
I mean, your whole body is affected by and affects your mind, right? So we label the brain, and we are used to saying that's the part that thinks. But the brain doesn't think without the whole rest of the body. It gets information from the whole rest of the body. It gives information, and the whole rest of the body has autonomous things that it does. Like you have reflexes that it doesn't consult the brain for. You put your hand on a hot stove, you pull it back, your brain isn't even being consulted. So we have even in the brain, it's decentralized. So we think about the brain as this one thing, but it's not like there's one part of the brain. We talk about executive function, but it's not like executive function is really bossing things around. It's one of the factors of making a decision about what you're going to do next, or think next, or say next. But it's certainly not the only one, and it certainly doesn't get a veto. It can get a vote. So it's so of course your heart, and of course there's not only do we have to consider parts of our body that have neurons. So there's neurons distributed throughout our body, right? Because that's why we can feel things with our hands, etc. Not only do we have to consider that, we need to consider the interstitium, which is Neil Thies's wonderful discovery, which is this communicative network, this organ that communicates in the fascia throughout our bodies. And throughout our entire bodies, you could strip away everything but the interstitium and you would see an outline of someone's body, right? And it communicates potentially using photons, so it may be faster than communication using electrons, extremely fast, right? Speed of light. And that may be a big story about how our mind works as well. So I think we have to let go of this sort of old world view. There is, in general in science, there has been this view of this side being the correct side. So wherever most of the results, this side. It's so confusing because it's flipped. But wherever most of the results are is where truth will be found. And there's been this kind of attitude in science about it's a stingy attitude. It's not a generous attitude. It's like, well, we're going to worry a lot about type 1 errors where you think that's something, you think you've shown something, but it's not true. But we're going to completely ignore type 2 errors, which are statistical errors in which you miss something because you think it's bogus, or you think it's just noise. So the focus has been on type 1 errors. I think that's starting to shift. I think we're starting to realize, again, with the advent of quantum computing and realizing, wait, the universe really doesn't work the way we thought it did. All these sort of weaker signals, I'm going to put that over here, all these sort of weaker signals from the edges of the phenomena that we see are starting to gain importance. So no longer, I think, should we go around saying things like, well, the brain and the mind are related, but the heart and the mind aren't, or the toe and the mind aren't. It's like, oh, come on. They have different relationships, maybe they have different relationships, but honestly, back to the bosonic particles, I'm not sure the location of the organ makes a difference. You know, it's one way to spread out a bunch of receptive and computational cells in our body. One way to do that is to put them in different organs.
Interesting. What is intuition in your view? Is it something just some prior experience hanging in our unconscious, which is pulled out at the moment that we need it? Or what is it? That's the conventional view, right?
Yeah, I think that conventional story is, I would give a little twist on the conventional story. The conventional story is that the dominant thing that matters is your consciousness, and also what we call the rational mind. So this is like the Daniel Kahneman story, system 1, system 2, where system 1 is the fast, according to him, biased, intuitive, emotional system, as system 2 is the slower because, well, we'll get to that, but it's slower and it's less biased, or we think we can correct our biases, and is more rational. But the sort of the thing that, I mean, he's dead, so I'll be nice, but also he's dead, so I don't really have to be nice. But the thing
we're trying to be objective, Julie.
No, I'm not trying to be objective at all. I think it's a lost cause. I don't think that's possible. But what is possible is to say that what's missing from that theory is answering the key question, which is what is the relationship between system 1 and system 2? And he knows as well as anybody, and I know he knows this because one of my postdoc advisors was a student, or he knew, that system 1 creates system 2. And towards the end of his life, he actually gave an interview where he talked about this. But what he's calling the irrational, quick, biased, intuitive system is the only thing that could have created system 2. Because the system 1, this intuitive system, is closer to the physical roots of the brain, right? It's closer to the physical roots of the brain. It's closer to the perceptions that we weed out. The conscious, quote unquote, rational system 2 inherits all the biases from system 1 and then adds biases on top of that because it thinks it's supposed to be able to understand everything. And so it's trying to simplify everything into what it's not very smart. See, so it's like a not very smart person who says, well, I have to understand everything. They're going to simplify it into like 4 factors, which is literally what the conscious mind does. So you've got this kind of really brilliant, massive parallel processing, but quiet computer, which is system 1. And then you've got like a stupid serial processing, egoic, thinks that it's smart computer, which is practically a calculator. And that's the one, that's system 2. That's the one we call the amazing accomplishment of humanity is the rational mind. Oh, really? Like, there's this great paper called Not So Much Rational, but Rationalizing. Came out in American Psychologist about 4 years back, I think. And their point was, we're not rational. We rationalize everything. That is literally the job of system 2. I'm not even sure it's a great thing to do. Like, sometimes things are better understood intuitively, and that doesn't need to bubble up to the conscious mind. Just let your body and your mind and your behaviors be driven by your massively parallel computer that's smarter than your conscious mind. That can get you in trouble, but also your conscious mind can get you into even more trouble.
True. You know that the Oracle of Delphi allegedly used some earth gases to enter into an altered state of consciousness in order to prophesy. Do your research subjects enter in some sort of altered state of consciousness to achieve ESP? And the other question, can we all do that? Is it something that we have inherent in us? Can we develop it? Those two questions I have in one.
Yeah, so the entering the altered states of consciousness where the thinking mind, this part I'm talking about, system 2, dies down in importance, is key to people who are gifted, to people who are skilled. And if people are learning these skills like precognition, I'll speak to directly, if people are learning that, that's the key struggle. So I've been working with super forecasters who, the intelligence community in the US have developed these screening programs for people who are really good at predicting future events, but they think it's based on analytical skills. So they have access to all sorts of information, and they try to figure out, will the dollar drop, on September 11th, 2024? And they use all these analytical methods, etc. But some of them, and I've talked to 2 now, who are gifted at super forecasting, but they think they're precognitive. They think they don't actually use that analytical method. They think that they're gathering data intuitively. And so I'm testing them on precognition where there's no analytical data you can gather, because the target sort of answer to the question is decided by a random number generator that's truly random in the future. So I don't know the answer. They don't know the answer at the time that they're trying to get the answer to the question. So the reason I'm bringing this up is that it's a real hard flip for them, because they're so used to being in this world where, show us your analysis. How did you figure this out? Da 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 da. And discounting, they've been trained to discount all bias, because there's data showing that if you're doing something analytical, your bias can really mess that up, right? If you're not conscious of it, right? So that's good reason to discount bias in that context. But this is a new context where your bias is like key information.
Your tool, yeah.
Yeah, it's all you have.
Yeah.
So I have to train them. And so one of them, I said, okay, so he tried it the first time without anything. And he's like, I got nothing. I got nothing. And I was like, okay, I'd like you to try listening to this binaural beats. That might put your brain maybe in a place where you stop with the thinking mind so much. So he's going to try that. If that doesn't work, we're going to try some meditation. We'll try some singing, some chanting, some drumming, all these things that people have used. I don't like to suggest psychedelics for 2 reasons. One is I've never done psychedelics, and so I don't want to suggest something that I've never done and that could be illegal. Depends. And 2, people who do psychedelics and report experiences like this can't seem to so often integrate them back out. So it teaches you that you need to take the psychedelic to get into that state. But I think we need to learn how to get into that state like that, right? So it's like a flow state. So getting into a flow state is part of any expert's capacity, right? So I'm wanting to teach people to get into that flow state. But it is a flow state. And you do have to turn off your thinking mind. So whether it's sound or dance or whatever drug you favor that you can maintain in your life, or waking up directly from a dream, or when you're falling asleep, you don't completely. So another key piece of this is you don't ignore the thinking mind, because you have to communicate. Something has to communicate from this nonverbal image-oriented, sound-oriented, brilliant processor, something has to communicate those experiences to the outside world so that you can say, like, wow, I have this feeling that there's this tree and it's gonna fall down on the house and it's falling down on the house. You know, you need that communication. You always have to have this relationship between these systems. So you don't turn off the thinking all the way. And I think that might be part of the problem with using psychedelics for this, is because you're no longer interested in actually like getting the data down. Depending on the psychedelic and the user or the experiencer. So, yes, I think that's the answer to that question.
Do you think we have free will? Is future predetermined? If we do have free will, to what extent?
So I've always thought the free will problem is misconstrued. The focus is on the free and the will, and the focus isn't on who are we talking about. So I think if you identify, if who we're talking about is your body, connected with your personal conscious awareness, you do not have free will. Because you're not including the unconscious components that drive your behavior and that make you think that you have free will.
Really? So,
yeah. So, but if you're including in your identity those unconscious components, which, by the way, are so close to physical reality that they might as well include what you had for breakfast this morning, what your genes are, who your parents are, who your parents' parents are, who your children are, where you are in space-time right now, and where you were yesterday and where you'll be tomorrow. If you include all of that, you start to include sort of the entire calculation of the universe through all of space-time. That's the only instance where I think you actually have absolute free will, because your identity is now the entire universe. So the little you no longer exists as an identity. So does the entire universe have free will? Yes. But I think it has free will all at once. So the way I think about time is that all events are calculated all at once through all the history of time. And so in that form of free will, yes, the universe has free will. Does an individual, Julia, does Natalia, do we have free will as individuals in a future that's undetermined? No.
I always thought about free will, this metaphor, which sort of made sense to me, but now you confused me thoroughly.
Good.
And the metaphor was that if you say life in general as a big story life, not life as a little me, right? But if life is a river, right, and we are swimmers, so you have a choice to swim with the river or against the river, against the flow. So that's the type of free will which kind of makes sense on a kind of large scale. But what would you say? Or it's completely off, is it?
I just don't think that the little you has a choice. I think I'm not saying that we don't experience free will. We experience choices, and we make choices all the time. There's no doubt. And I'll tell you, I will make the choice today to take a break and have lunch at some point. And I'm making that choice right now, and we'll see if it actually happens. I could get hit by a bus, or I could forget to have lunch, right? Right? But I have the experience of having the will to make a choice. And so the experience of free will, of course we have that. And the experience is real. It's not that experience isn't real. But when we talk about what creates that experience of free will, do we control what creates that experience of free will? No, we don't. That is all of our unconscious processing that creates the experience of free will. Do we control what creates the choice that we have when we're experiencing free will? No, we don't. That's all the unconscious processing. By we, I mean this little us. See, because we're so used to thinking that what's important is the little us. And so when we ask free will, we don't even ask who's asking the question. But if the entire universe is asking the question, of course we have free will. That's who we really are. That's who we really are, right? So when you really identify with what you really are, of course you have free will. You're a piece of this calculation of the entire universe, and you're not just you're also the calculator, because that's part of the universe. It's a big thing, and there's one of it, and so yes, that one thing has free will.
Why is this big thing created these little stories, which we call eyes, which we don't know who we really are, right? That's what you're saying, because we only experience a little part of us, right? Consciously speaking. Why?
I don't know. It's so entertaining. But
it's all about entertainment.
Yeah, it's entertainment.
Back to the cliche.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. All I know is that it's not true that we don't experience the big thing. In fact, we're given this sleep thing, which I just think sleep is such a marvel. We sleep, and when we sleep, we absolutely experience what it is to not be the little I, especially during deep sleep when we kind of don't exist, right? And we don't remember existing. It's a daily experience that we don't talk about, of dissolving, the identity dissolving. And we just ignore it. But it's true for every human and most animals. So it feels to me like it's pretty fun to play hide and go seek. I appreciate that mystical insight that if there was one of you, you would make more than one of you to play hide and go seek.
Yeah, the Kabbalah story says there was one, right? And there was so much love that it needed another to love somebody else. And that sparked the division, which we ended up with the universe and ourselves learning how to love, right?
Yeah. And it's amazing. That's how mitosis works, you know. It's beautiful.
Yeah. But do you think that from point of view of our daily life and so forth, can our future influence present or past? It can.
Well, it depends on, can we define influence for a second? So if the universe is calculated all at once, which is sort of the cosmology that I hold, and from the beginning to the end of time, so it's almost like a painting or a sculpture that's made all at once, past, future, and present are related to how humans and other, who knows about other animals, how humans perceive experience, how humans experience, right? So you could imagine an animal that just experiences the entire landscape of time, but is also aware of where they are physically wandering over that landscape. Like, I perceive the map, entire map, but I'm aware that right now I'm on my way up a mountain. I'm aware that when I get to the top of the mountain, I'll die, and I'm aware of all of that. You can imagine an animal that's like that. For most humans, that's not how we are. So when we talk about the future affecting the past, I like to think about it as, can the fact that there's a valley on the other side of a mountain, can that impact the nature of the mountain itself? Yes, it can, right? Because the valley can influence the way wind is going to move around the mountain and can influence erosion. And so even though if I'm walking across the landscape of time, I get to the mountain, even though all I can see is the mountain, I can also, if I'm sensitive to it, notice the effect of the erosion of the wind. If I understand that, I can get information about the valley that would be following the mountain in my path. So I feel like that is the new relationship with time that we're going into as humanity. We're starting to understand the physics of how to be sensitive to the facts of what is present and how those relate to what is in the future.
Well, how my future can influence the way you describe
it just feels to us like the past influences the present, and we've been trained to feel like the future cannot influence the present. Once you let go of that training and start to consider the future as also a boundary condition, it changes the way you think about physics. If you're a physicist, which the transactional interpretation and the two-state vector formalism of quantum mechanics, those two interpretations kind of do that. They change the way you think about time as a physicist. But for physicists, for people who are not physicists, it changes the way you think about your life. And actually, I think it puts you into something else I've studied called a balanced time perspective. So when you start to develop relationships between your present self and internal representations of your past and your future selves. So this is literally like talking to your past self and saying, I'm so sorry you had to go through that. So when I was a kid, I went through some really rough situations. And I visited my past self and said, I'm sorry you have to go through that. And now I have a memory of being young and a woman visiting me and saying that in my mind's eye. I don't know if that's a real memory or if that's an implanted memory from the fact that I've done this, and I don't care, because it's been very powerful in terms of healing. And you could do the same thing to your past self, and you could also receive information and healing from your future self all through imagination, all through your mind's eye. You don't have to claim any special powers. You just imagine it, and you just allow your imagination to show you that. And as you do that, one of the things I showed with my group at Tilt, the Institute for Love and Time, which is a nonprofit that I started with Wolfram Alderson in 2019. Well, one of the things that we've shown with our technology, and that I will tell you to check it out, it's going to go through a new launch very soon, so timemachine.live. But one of the things we've shown is that when people practice leaving messages for themselves over time, and in fact, this was also recently shown with the MIT Media Lab, a different version of this. I like ours better, but anyway. When people give themselves messages from their future selves or to their past selves or vice versa, there's this balance in time perspective that boosts well-being. So there's this capacity to feel stronger in time. I think of it like a necklace where the beads on the string are the moments of the events in your life, but the string itself is your self, your identity. And of course you're stronger when you realize my past self is still there, my present self is still there, and we can all reinforce and support each other. So I feel that that's also where we're headed, towards integrating into the present moment, the past and the future, so that we can heal and be strong and get closer to the reality of what is.
Could it be that the future self also influences choices which I make at present time, life choices, career possibly, and that could also be the case, right? But I can very much relate to what you're saying, although I haven't thought about it. So what I tend to do when I think about or remember some past experiences, I tend to say to them, don't worry, it's gonna be okay. You will go through it and it'll be fine. And then I remember when I actually was going through experiences, I had this thought popping up all of a sudden, it's all going to be okay. It's going to be fine. Maybe it's me talking to me in the past. Who knows, But I haven't thought about that, actually. So
yeah, I mean, I've had profound healing experiences during times of great distress through this sort of time travel narrative method. And I mean, I think it saved my life as a kid, and I think it continues to help. And I know that there's psychological evidence for it. We're in a transitional period culturally where we're starting to take these things more seriously because we're starting to change the way we think about reality. And it's going to take another 20 or so years before there's the real flip. But the flip is happening. Like 10 years ago, we didn't feel like it was happening. Now it feels like it's happening. People are taking, again, I think it's because of quantum computing and the money that's behind that. People are taking other ways of thinking about reality seriously because they're real.
What is time for you? What is the nature of time if we had to explain it to people? We experience as linear, right? But is it linear or is it non-linear? Are there multiple timelines, or what is time?
Time is it's a human reaction to something that's fundamental. So there's when I say that things like time is fundamental, and love I think is more fundamental than time. But when I say things like time is fundamental, what I mean is the calculation of everything all at once. Personally, I'm not. I just aesthetically, and also for simplicity's sake, and also just at a gut level, I don't think the multiple timelines thing is real. I think everything got calculated all at once and is constantly being calculated all at once. When I say got calculated, I don't mean to imply a time, because I think time is fundamental. And I think time is the thing that we're responding to that calculated this all at once. Right? So what is it made from? Love. What is the action of calculating all at once? Time. And our response to it, our human experience of time, of the flow of time, of the order of events, of synchrony and of asynchrony, duration, these things are responses to different forms of this calculation. It's like the color green is perceived by humans in a particular way. We're responding to the calculation of frequency of an object, right, of the light that's emitted from an object. So, so the substance, so the nature of time is a human response to the substance of time, which is the action of calculation of the universe.
It's a bit difficult to grasp, isn't it? When you think about calculating everything at the same time, that actually means that everything, at some level, everything exists simultaneously at the same time. And it's just our experience is sequential, right?
Right.
So essentially what we're saying is that time fundamentally, objectively, does not exist, because it's all exists at the same time, because what we understand as time is a little clock moving, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, next now, next now, next now, next now, right?
Right.
So
that's a cross between sort of Julian Barber's thing, where he says time doesn't exist, who's a physicist, and Lee Smolden's thing, where he says, I sort of get that, but at the same time, time is fundamental. But using a different word for, I think that where time comes from, we are responding to something real when we see a clock go like this. We are responding to something real when we are born babies and we die old people, right? We are responding to something real that is in the physics of the universe. Our story about it is that the future doesn't exist until we get there. The past, there's nothing we can do to change it, and we're in the now. That's our story about it. But the story is in response to something real, and the experience itself is made to respond to something real. It's representing to us something that is real, right? So if you look at Donald Hoffman's work about the interface theory of perception, our experience is a story about something that's real that helps us survive, right? So when it comes to the reality of what is real about time, yes, as Julian Barber says, time doesn't exist. The time in the physical world doesn't exist the way we experience it. But as Lee Smolden says, time as the calculation of everything, that's how I conceive of time, certainly exists because there is everything. So it becomes almost an informational argument.
Yeah. The way I explained it myself, why do we need to experience time, right? And in our little story, what we understand as us, is I think that's the only way we can experience change. Because if everything is calculated all at the same time, it's all there. All the potentialities, everything is there, right? So there is no change. It's just static thing.
We can, although I do like this model of the animal, and this reminds me of the movie Arrival. The animal with Amy Adams and Jeremy Renner and other folks. I love that movie. But the animal in that movie is aware of all the events of time, at least important events, right? So one of the statements of the animal in that movie that visits is when asked, why are you helping us? It says, in 3,000 years, we will need your help. So we're helping you now because of that. So that animal is aware of the map of time, but also of where they are in the map of time. So I think that's where we're headed. So we don't have to, it's not necessary that in order to experience change, we have to be unaware of the map of time. We can still experience change, right? We can be in a now, but we don't have to believe that the future is unknowable or the past cannot be changed. We could just recognize that the way our perception works is that we are in the now. And we can be aware of this other information.
Yeah, how to be here and now, because now is gone. It's gone. It's gone. All we experience is not really now, unless you're in some meditative state, which the only possibility I could see that you could really stop now, you could experience now. Our regular life, we experience past moments because now is gone. I only can look back at what's already passed. So that's a bit of a weird construction, I would say.
It's what we had to do, right? If we're going to tell, if your conscious experience is a story presented to you by for the non-conscious parts of your mind and brain and body, then it has to be elusive, right? Because it's a story about something that just happened. So there is no now, really. But there's an experience of it now, and again, experiences are real, and we have to work with that. We have to understand human experience in light of physical reality. They're both important.
You know, the reason why I ask about multiple timelines is because sometimes when you read about precognition research, it's not one outcome that people predict. They predict the most likely one, right? But there are sometimes multiple outcomes that could happen. So then I thought, okay, then the multiple timelines could explain that sort of phenomena. What's your view on this?
Oh, right. I forgot to address that. Thank you. The multiple timelines thing, I think, comes from the many worlds hypothesis. So this is Everett's hypothesis in physics. Or Everett at least was very involved in it. I think it was his hypothesis. Anyway, it's a way to explain things without using retrocausality. So if you want to maintain forward causality and you want to decide that the future is not yet calculated, then, so basically you're trying to save free will, then the many timelines thing saves free will because you say, oh, I made a choice and now I'm on a different timeline. And I just think that that is motivated by a psychological desire to save free will for the individual I. And so I just don't buy into it. I just feel like, no, I mean, you could just explain the whole thing by either all at once calculation or past and future agreeing on the present. Either of these things don't require multiple timelines. And also, the whole project of saving free will feels like basically an ego rescue project. And I think we could let go of that.
In this whole story that love is fundamental reality, where do we place consciousness? Because sometimes you hear consciousness is fundamental reality. So
I think we get a little confused about consciousness because we use it for two different things. So we use it to mean, my individual conscious experience. I have the experience that I'm talking with you and the wind is blowing, right? And sometimes we use it to mean like big C consciousness, sort of the consciousness of the world, which is sort of vaguely defined, or of the universe, or whatever. I think that when people are saying that big C consciousness is fundamental, they're talking about what I mean when I say love is fundamental. And I think the little C consciousness, we should stop using the same word for this because little C consciousness is it's a stupid computer. It's not as amazing as people. I mean, if you want to study something amazing, study the unconscious mind. It's like you're studying the puppet, but you're not studying the puppeteer. It's it's not so amazing. I guess the reason I say that is, one, because individual conscious experience is so slow and small and stupid. But two, because it's not special. Like what it is, at least in my view, the brain is a tool, and the body are tools for interacting with this thing that already exists everywhere on a non-physical level. But because we so privilege physical things, we think that it's creating it. So it's just, it's not special to have subjective experience. It's not. But I think what that is at the big level is what I'm calling love, this bridge between the dual nature of things. Yeah.
What do you think is the future of AI, and where are we heading as humanity? Because there is this raging debate. AI will become conscious in the future. Okay, now not possible, but in the future it will definitely become, and it will be the master of the universe. I'm kidding, of course, but the master of the planet for sure. Where do you see this going?
I think AI is another example of something that could eventually, or maybe already is, conscious in the sense of it could have subjective experience. Probably, like we don't understand subjective experience very much at all. So I'd like to err on the side of saying, well, I don't know if it gets complex enough, or maybe you don't even need that much complexity. Maybe kind of everything has subjective experience. It's a subjective. I think the key question is, what is this subjective experience? I mean, if it has a subjective experience, let's assume that for a second. What is it like to be an AI, and a particular AI? What is it like to be an open AI? AI, like a ChatGPT, might be different than what it's like to be Gemini, a Claude. So, or even a machine learning algorithm, right? So, what is it like to be a person? We can make some phenomenological statements about that sort of in general, and we'll be wrong because of anthropology and so recognition that different people actually think differently. But we'll be somewhat right, you know. What is it like to be an AI? Similar problems. But I think that the concern about consciousness being like some big stumbling block or some big, like get over it, like being conscious is not special. Like the future, of course, will have AI. If we have the same resources where AIs can eventually learn to create themselves, and we have decentralized AI where they can have peer-to-peer interactions with each other and you know, pay for each other's electricity and such, then of course, then basically we have created another species that uses silicon, you know, until it doesn't. So it just sort of feels to me like this is what we do as humans. We make babies. This is a different kind of baby. This is like humanity's baby. Will it grow up to be a sociopath? I don't know. Will anyone's baby grow up to be a sociopath? Kind of depends on how they're raised. Kind of depends on the love. And it depends on the future, the ethics, and also who's pulling for the future.
Okay. Yeah, we have love to explore, but the second question is also important, especially for people for students and for young scientists who may want to explore ESP. What piece of advice could you give to them? And also, what's your view on the future of science?
Anyone who wants to explore ESP, go learn about the mind and how the mind works just generally. And maybe learn a little about physics, quantum computing. Try to understand anything, like read Richard Feynman, maybe, to understand quantum mechanics in a very engaging and fluid, intuitive way. And just ask interesting questions questions that you think are interesting, but then learn how to do tractable science based on those questions. Work with someone who can do rigorous work and show you how to do rigorous work. but who also allows you to graduate from your graduate program.
Which brings
so
me to the future of science. What's the future of science then?
The future of science? I mean, the future of science is very exciting because we're going through a time, I think, now where we're past the modern era where we had the story that we had everything basically figured out and we were just going to dot some I's and cross some T's. And we're going into the complete, like, oh, maybe we got it all wrong phase, which is so relaxing to me personally because it's like, yes, of course you have it all wrong because we're nowhere near understanding everything. So I think the future of science is super exciting and leans towards changing the way we do education. It leads towards changing the way we do relationships. It leads towards changing the way we do economies and nation states and the way we relate when science comes back to its relationship with mysticism, which is where it was born. And mysticism and science start working together again. That's an exciting future landmark in my mind. So we're just in it. We're in the tunnel. We're in the tunnel where there's a lot of feelings and a lot of fear and a lot of anger and concern, but there's also hope and there's also anticipation and vision, and it's a very active tunnel.
Julia, thank you very much for this interview.
Thank you.
After our conversation with Julia, I kept thinking about free will. Somehow her view that we as individual conscious selves have no agency at all felt unsatisfactory. It just didn't ring true. Yet those who have experienced diamonds in their lives, and what I mean by that is when you have to go and do something in the middle of the night, like writing, painting, or composing, and it feels like you are driven by forces external, seemingly external to yourself. You know that it's all about the greater purpose and the power beyond yourselves. Perhaps all our choices are predetermined by nature, including our freedom to swim with or against the flow of life. And then the sign of ultimate faith is to believe that if it could have been different, it would have been different. And what do you think about it? Do we have a free will? Let us know in the comments. If you want to know more about daimonic reality, watch our interview with Patrick Harper. And also the video of Bernardo Kastrup will elaborate further on the free will. Thank you for watching.